For 6 months, the house next door was a hollow shell. Lisa and I had grown to love the vacancy. No loud music, no barking dogs, just the peaceful silence of a suburban void. We felt like kings of a quiet kingdom. Then came the night the silence broke. It was exactly 3 a.m. when headlights swept across my bedroom ceiling like prison searchlights. I stumbled to the window, rubbing sleep from my eyes. A white, unmarked van coasted into the neighbor's driveway. The headlights were off, leaving only the eerie, sickly glow of the amber undercarriage lights reflecting on the wet concrete. The driver emerged. He was a man buried in greasy coveralls, his face a smudge of darkness. He didn't look like a new homeowner moving in furniture. He looked like he was disposing of evidence. He began dragging crates from the back of the van, large, heavy, industrial metal crates. Screech! The sound of metal grinding against concrete was visceral. It felt like nails being driven into my eardrums. He moved with a stiff, mechanical rhythm. Drag, lift, drop, thud. The hollow sound echoed through the street. He disappeared into the garage, and the heavy door slammed shut.
That was just the beginning. The man, I called him the mechanic, sealed himself in. The front curtains were never drawn. He lived, breathed, and worked entirely within the confines of that garage, and the garage never slept. Every night from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., the symphony of nightmares began. It started with a low, rhythmic scraping, like a whetstone against a blade, or perhaps something heavy being dragged across a floor. Then came the thuds, wet, heavy impacts that vibrated through the shared air between our houses. It sounded like heavy bags of wet sand being thrown against the walls. By the 5th night, my nerves were frayed wires. I grabbed my phone, using the camera zoom to spy on the small, cracked window of his garage. He had pasted old newspapers over the glass, but time had curled the edges. Through a sliver of space, I saw it. The strobe light flicker of a welding torch. Blue arcs of light danced on the walls. Shadows stretched and contorted. He was welding something, hanging, something long, limp, and heavy, suspended from a chain. It swayed slightly. It looked disturbingly organic. "Mark," Lisa whispered, shaking me awake hours later. "There's someone in the yard." I listened. Scratch, shovel, dirt. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the kitchen. Through the sliding glass door, the backyard was a pit of darkness. I flipped the switch. The floodlight exploded into life, illuminating the mechanic. He was crouched by the fence, frantically digging. He froze like a deer in headlights, his eyes wide and wild. He wasn't burying trash. Half buried in the dirt was a sneaker, a small, colorful child sneaker, caked in dark mud. Or was it blood? He dropped the shovel, vaulted the fence with terrifying agility, and vanished into his garage. The next morning, I knew I had to confront him. I stood on my lawn, staring at his house. Suddenly, I saw him. Second floor window. He was standing there, staring right back. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He looked like a wax figure. I raised a hand, a nervous wave. He didn't wave back. Instead, he slowly tilted his head to the side, a bird-like, twitchy movement. Then his face split open, a grin, a wide, lopsided, yellow-toothed grin that stretched too far across his face. We locked eyes for 20 agonizing seconds. He was dissecting me with his gaze. That night was the breaking point. My neighbor, Gene, ran over, his face the color of ash. "Mark, you have to hear this." We crept to the side of the mechanic's garage. The scraping had stopped. Now there was a new sound, muffled sobbing, the desperate, choked cries of someone gagged. Then a voice, deep, gravelly, and calm. "Shut up or I'll cut the other finger off." Then the smell hit us. It rolled out from the garage vents, a thick, chemical cloud of bleach and ozone.
It burned my nose. He was cleaning. I called 911. The police swarmed the house, battering rams, smashing the door. But the mechanic was gone. The van was gone. What they found in the garage haunts me. It wasn't a workshop. It was a soundproof chamber lined with acoustic foam. In the center sat an antique dentist's chair, the leather straps stained black with dried fluids. The concrete floor was a map of suffering, deep scratches from fingernails trying to claw away. And in the backyard, that hole he was digging wasn't for a body, it was for space. They found a glass jar buried there. Inside were souvenirs, teeth, locks of hair, small finger bones. The house is empty again, but sometimes when the wind blows, I can still smell the bleach. When you're 7 years old, monsters are supposed to be under the bed. In my neighborhood, the monster lived next door. His name was Mr. Hanks. He was a recluse, a shadow that lived behind grimy curtains. He never waved, never smiled. He just watched. Specifically, he watched my mother. Whenever she was in the garden hanging laundry, I would see that single bloodshot eye peering through the gap in his blinds. It was a hungry look. My dad went on a business trip in late autumn. Mr. Hanks must have been watching the driveway because he knew the moment we were alone. The second night, a storm rolled in. The rain lashed against the siding like gravel, and the wind howled through the eaves. At midnight, the house was dark. Knock. Knock. Soft. Polite. I woke up. My mom froze in her bed. She crept to the door and checked the peephole. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Silence. She backed away. "Whoever it is, they aren't leaving," she whispered to herself. 30 minutes later, bang, bang, bang. The politeness was gone. The knocking was angry now, rhythmic and heavy. Then came a metallic scratch, like a knife testing the wood of the door. The doorknob jiggled violently. My mother didn't scream. She went into survival mode. She walked to my father's closet and pulled out the 12-gauge shotgun. Her hand shook as she loaded a shell, the clack-clack of the pump action echoing loud in the silent hallway. She sat in the hallway, facing the door. "I have a gun!" she screamed, her voice cracking but fierce. "It's loaded. If you touch that door again, I will shoot." Silence. Then the sound of heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He was walking away from the front door, but he didn't leave. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The footsteps circled the house. They went to the side, then the back. We heard the rusty screech of the back gate opening. We huddled together for 2 hours, listening to the storm and the occasional heavy footstep testing the perimeter. When the police finally arrived, the blue lights washed away the fear. They searched the grounds. "Ma'am, you need to see this," an officer said, his face pale. He held up an object found near the front porch. It wasn't a crowbar. It was a length of rusted barbed wire, about 4 feet long. Wooden handles had been tied to each end. "This wasn't for robbery," the officer said quietly. "This is a garrote, a catch-pole. If you had opened that door, he was going to loop this around you and drag you out." They found muddy boot prints. They started at the front door, circled the house, and ended in the backyard, right underneath my bedroom window. There were pry marks on the sill. He had tried to get to me when he couldn't get to her. As we packed our bags to leave forever, I looked next door. Mr. Hanks' curtain shifted. He was there, watching us leave. He knew he hadn't been caught. He was just waiting for the next family. The deal was impossible to pass up. A mobile home on 2 acres of dense forest, 10 minutes from the ski slopes for a price that screamed desperation. It was a shack, thin walls, drafty windows, creaky floors, but it was mine, a bachelor pad in the woods. I brought my dad up to help move furniture. That's when we met Dale. He lived in a similar trailer up the dirt road. He wandered over, hands in his pockets, watching us unload. He had a thick accent and eyes that didn't seem to focus on our faces, but rather on our possessions. He was sizing us up.
2 weeks later, I went up alone to install the Wi-Fi. The isolation hit differently when I was by myself. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. I had barely parked when Dale appeared. He didn't knock, he just stood in my open doorway. Thought I'd say hi, he grinned, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Come have a beer. I felt obligated to keep the peace. I went to his trailer. It was a graveyard of rusted metal and trash. The smell was sour, stale beer and unwashed clothes. As we drank, the facade dropped. City folk, he spat, crushing a can. Coming up here, ruining the mountain, polluting my woods. His voice rose to a shout. He wasn't talking to me anymore. He was ranting at an invisible enemy. I excused myself and practically ran back to my trailer. That night, the woods came alive. Midnight, I heard muttering. Not the wind, a human voice, low and angry, pacing back and forth, right outside the thin aluminum walls of my bedroom. Mumble, filths, get out, my land. I rolled out of bed and peeked through the blinds. Darkness. But when I checked the window glass the next morning, my heart stopped. A smudge of fresh mud, right at eye level. He had been pressing his face against the glass, watching me sleep. Noon. Bang, bang, bang. The trailer shook. Dale was pounding on the front door with both fists. I know you're in there, he roared. I can hear your breathing. I stayed silent, gripping a kitchen knife. He didn't leave. He began to circle the trailer, heavy boots stomping on the wooden deck. Then, a click. The hum of the refrigerator died. The Wi-Fi router went dark. He had found the external breaker box. He cut the power. I was alone, in the dark, miles from help, with a lunatic circling my tin can of a house. Nightfall. I was huddled on the couch, illuminated only by the dying battery of my phone. Creak. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. I couldn't take the suspense. I flipped the switch for the backyard floodlights, the only circuit still working on a separate fuse. The light blazed on. There he was, Dale. He was standing at the edge of the light where the lawn met the tree line. He was motionless. In his hand, gleaming in the artificial light, was a rusted crowbar. He wasn't hiding, he was waiting. When he saw me in the window, he didn't run. He took a single step back into the shadows, vanishing like a ghost, but I could feel his eyes still on me. Then the rocks started. Crash! A window shattered in the living room. Leave! No one wants you here! I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, sprinted out the back door, and dove into my truck. As I tore down the driveway, my headlights caught him. He was standing in the middle of the road, blocking my path, swinging the crowbar. I didn't slow down. I swerved into the ditch, mud flying, and roared past him. I did some research later. The previous owner of my trailer, he didn't just sell it, he vanished. 2 years ago, he filed a harassment complaint against a neighbor named Dale. Then, he disappeared off the face of the earth. Dale wasn't just a bad neighbor, he was a predator, clearing his territory. And I was just the latest intruder he managed to scare off, or worse.